I basically did this video in one take, so forgive me if I chat a load of rubbish. First up, Novelty Creams, straight into the S tier for me. They are immensely clacky. It's got a proper deep clack to it. There's no comparison, not the Durock POMs. Nothing else comes close. I know the POM on POM material is scratchy as hell, but this community overvalues smoothness way too much in my opinion. Next up is the Gateron Black Ink. If you asked me a year ago, I would have said this is easily S tier, but now I think it's A tier at the moment. It's thocky, the sound profile kind of changes with different plates, but I know my preference and it's not thocky anymore. I think this, the stem wobble's a little bit too much. You really need to film it. It's not as unique as I thought it once was. Onto the Tangerines. I used to not like these that much, but they have really, really gone up in my opinion. I really love the sound of them in my KBD 67 Lite. The unwipe housing gives it a really unique, soft sort of sound and feel. By far and away the absolute smoothest switch stock ever. So yeah, A tier for me. Next linear, this is a big one. I always recommend these switches to anyone who asks. Easily S tier, the Aqua Kings. Really, really nice switch. Nice and smooth stock. When you lube them, they feel really good. Housing super tight. They have this immense, unique, deep, poppy, not very plasticky kind of sound. Only issue is, I've heard a lot of stories of people getting switches like get stuck, the stem sort of doesn't return. I had one or two of these, but that's the price you pay for an almost perfect switch. Next linear, Lavenders. Very popular switch. Easily B tier, very solid switch. Long pole stem, nice bottomed out sound. It's a nice deep sound, not overly plasticky. Easily B tier, yeah, it's a good one. Next is the Zeal Telios. These were my first switch. They have a special place in my heart. They used to be higher ranked, but they're just not that great. They're not very unique. They sound a bit too high pitched for me. It's the polycarbonate housing. They are very expensive. You can get exactly the same sort of sound just buying one of the clear housing Durock switches, but it's still B tier for me. Next up is the Ipsilons, a new contender, easily B tier for me. Objectively, ticks all the boxes. Not much stem wobble, housing super tight. Probably don't need to lube or film these. They sounded really good stock. It's got a nice long spring. It gives it a nice sort of bouncier feel. I ranked it high in my review, but I think since then I've sort of realised it's not actually that unique or characteristic for me to give it a higher tier. Next up is the Gateron Box Ink. This is not a black ink. This is nothing like the black ink. This is not a black ink V3. It's a totally different switch. Like the Ypsilons though, on paper, it's a good switch. Low stem wobble. Housings are super nice. It's pretty smooth stock, but there's no uniqueness to it. It's a little bit too high pitched for me. Not overly plasticky, but it's still not my cup of tea. With that said, still a B tier in my opinion. Pretty good switch. Next up is the Quartz switch. Very similar to the Lavenders. They've got a long pole stem. This one is probably slightly higher pitched. It's very smooth. Like on paper, it's a pretty good switch if you like a long pole stem, good bottom out sound. Just again, not my cup of tea. Though still B tier in my opinion. Next up, the Gateron CJ Switches. They use the new Gateron housing molds. You can really tell these are super smooth, felt super good, a little bit high pitched. Fairly reasonably priced. They're cheaper than black inks, for instance. Not too much else to say. I really like these. They sound really nice on my KBD 67 Lite. There's not too much difference if you lube them or keep them stock. Very solid switch, in my opinion. B tier. Next up, we've got the banana splits, made by the same people that do this tangerines, but I personally don't think they're as good. It's the first C tier of today. Best way I can describe them is they're just a worse, more expensive version of an Alpaca. Now actually moving on to the Alpaca, I wasn't a huge fan of these initially. I didn't really get the hype, but they've definitely grown on me over time. They are immensely smooth, immensely solid. They have a really nice non-plasticky, sort of almost clacky kind of sound to them. Objectively, I think a very good switch. Next up, the Key First Creams. Not really much to say. F tier. Really wobbly, pretty cheap sounding, and the cheap sound being exaggerated by how loud they were. Next, Cherry Hyperguy Blacks. B tier for me. I wasn't expecting very much from these. They were pretty scratchy, but they sound pretty cool. Very solid switch. Nice and clacky, not plastic at all. I'll probably just reuse the top housing for some sort of Black Cherry Pie remake or something. And I can't help but feel that Cherry is a bit basic. Kinetic Lab Huskies, F tier in my opinion. Scratchy, loud, plasticky sounding. Not much to say. Only thing I liked was the 63 gram progressive long spring, which I stole from my Black Cherry Pies. KTT Strawberry linear switches. They are probably somewhere in between a quartz and a lavender. They have long pole stem. That's probably the best way I can describe them, to be honest. But a pretty solid switch overall. I don't think many people have actually even heard of this switch. You don't really hear about them very often. Gateron Black KS3. Considering how dirt cheap they are really good. They're like a cheap-ish version of a Cherry Hyperguy Black. Really clacky, not too smooth, not too loud. Good overall switch. Probably a good recommendation for a first-time custom keyboard build. Last of all, Kale Pro Burgundy. I used these to steal the stem for a Franken switch, as they have immensely long stem poles. The Kale housing's super tight and good. Really not much else to say. They're only F tier, but they just bored me out of my mind. If you made it this far through my ramblings, hats off to you. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed making videos for, it's been like almost a year now, so I just want to say thanks.